The boy had been waiting for 14 days, 6 years old, 40 pounds, sitting on cold concrete steps outside a convenience store in Ashford, a dying city that had forgotten how to care. His name was Miles Donovan, knees to his chest, arms wrapped around himself, the only thing holding him together. The city walked past him, workers, police, ordinary people with ordinary excuses. Some left food, most left nothing. Everyone told themselves the same lie. Someone else would help. His father had said to wait here. So he waited. $23 in his pocket, the last money his dad gave him before walking into the chemical plant that exploded 14 days ago. Miles didn't know his father was dead. He only knew to wait. On the 14th morning, a black Bentley stopped across the street. The man inside was Reed Hartley, 36 years old, the most dangerous man in the Northeast, a crime lord, an empire builder, a name that made cops look away and businessmen sweat. But 7 years ago, his enemies murdered his wife and his 4-year-old son. They wanted to break him, and they did. He built a kingdom with nothing left inside. Then he saw the boy. Reed stepped out, pedestrians scattered. He walked toward Miles and saw everything at once: cracked lips, hollow cheeks, small hands trembling, 2 weeks of waiting for a ghost. Reed asked if he was waiting for someone. The boy looked up, green eyes, too old for 6 years, and they hit Reed like a knife because they looked exactly like his dead son's eyes. Miles said he was waiting for his dad, that his dad told him to wait here. Reed asked how long. Miles said 14 days. Reed felt something crack inside him, a wall 7 years thick. Reed asked if he'd eaten. Miles shook his head. Reed asked if he'd eaten yesterday. Another shake. Reed took a breath, the kind a man takes when his life is about to change. Reed told him there was a place across the street, that Miles could see these steps from the window. Miles hesitated, then looked at Reed's face, the face that terrified grown men, and asked if he promised. Reed said he promised. They crossed the street together, a broken king and a waiting child. 14 days of waiting was ending, but a different kind of waiting was just beginning, the kind that leads to healing, the kind that saves 2 lives instead of 1. If this hit your heart, like and share it now. Subscribe, the next part will break you. May's kitchen sat directly across from the convenience store, a small diner with a weathered sign and the smell of hot food drifting out through the glass door. Reed pushed the door open and stepped inside, Miles right behind him, his tiny footsteps slow and careful, as if he was afraid to be away from the steps for too long. The doorbell rang. The woman behind the counter looked up and froze in place. May Langston, 58 years old, the owner, a woman who had lived in Ashford for more than 30 years and knew every face in this city. She knew who Reed Hartley was. Everyone in Ashford knew. Her hands tightened around the dish towel, trying to stay calm even as her heart hammered in her chest. Reed didn't say anything. He only nodded slightly toward the table by the window, the one with a clear view of the convenience store steps across the street. Miles understood immediately. He climbed onto the chair, turned his face toward the window, and fixed his green eyes on the steps, as if he was afraid to miss something important. Reed sat across from him and ordered a bowl of chicken pho and a glass of warm milk. May brought the food out and set it in front of Miles. The boy didn't touch it, didn't look at it. He only kept watching the steps. May stood there for a moment, staring at the thin child with eyes far too old for a 6-year-old face. She had seen him sitting on those steps for the past 2 weeks. She had left bread late at night when no one was watching. She had told herself someone would help, that it wasn't her problem. May leaned down close to Reed, her voice a trembling whisper. That boy, Mr. Hartley, the chemical plant explosion 2 weeks ago. His father, I think he worked the night shift there. Reed didn't react. He only stood up and walked outside, leaving Miles still staring out the window. The cold air cut into his skin as he stood on the sidewalk, pulled out his phone, and called Jonah. Find me everything on Connor Donovan, Ashford chemical plant worker. Fast. Jonah didn't ask why. The 42-year-old man had worked for Reed long enough to know when to ask and when to stay silent. 5 minutes later, Reed's phone vibrated. Connor Donovan, Jonah said, his voice low and slow, like he was reading a sentence. 34 years old. Night shift worker. Listed among 7 dead in the explosion on the 17th of last month. No wife. Wife died in childbirth. No living relatives. His rented apartment was cleared out by the landlord and rented to someone else because no one was paying. Reed closed his eyes. 7 dead, One child sitting and waiting 14 days, and no one stopped. Anything else? He asked. There's a piece of land, Jonah continued, inherited from his grandfather. Out on the outskirts. Not worth much, but I'll check further. Reed ended the call and stood there for a long time, looking through the glass into the diner. Miles was still sitting perfectly still, eyes still locked on the steps, the bowl of pho untouched, waiting for someone who would never come back. Reed walked inside, sat down across from Miles. The boy didn't turn, still staring out the window. You should eat, Reed said. Aren't you hungry? Miles shook his head faintly. I have to wait for my dad. Dad said he'd buy pizza when he got back. Silence. Reed watched the child in front of him, the small hands gripping the hem of his shirt, the cracked lips, the heartbreaking steadiness in his eyes. He could lie. He could say your dad will be back soon. He could stand up and walk away like everyone else had. But Reed Hartley wasn't a man who lied to children, and he wasn't a man who walked away anymore. Not today. Miles. The boy turned, green eyes looking straight into Reed. Your dad can't come back anymore. No explanation, no softening, only the truth, bare and cruel, like life itself. Miles didn't cry. He didn't scream or wail the way people imagined a 6-year-old would when told his father was dead. He only sat there, and his hands slowly slipped into his pocket, closing around $23, the last money his father had given him. The silence stretched on, long enough that Reed could hear the clock ticking on the wall, the traffic outside, the slow beat of his own heart in his chest. Then Miles spoke. His voice was small and quiet as breath, but every word landed with painful clarity. Then who do I wait for now? The question pierced Reed like a bullet. It went through the expensive suit, through flesh and bone, through the 7-year wall he had built to keep himself separate from the world. It touched something he had thought died a long time ago. James had once asked him the same thing. Daddy, when are you coming home? I'll wait for you. Reed looked at Miles. Miles looked at Reed. And in that moment, the most powerful crime boss in the Northeast was no longer a crime boss at all. He was only a man looking at a child who had no one left in the world. You're coming with me. Miles didn't ask where, didn't ask why. He only nodded, as if that was the answer he had been waiting for 14 days. Not his father, but someone who had finally stopped. Reed didn't take Miles to his penthouse. It sat on the top floor of the most luxurious building in Ashford, all glass and cold steel, where he had lived alone for 7 years like a ghost drifting through empty rooms. It wasn't a place for a child. It wasn't safe either. Too many enemies knew that address. Too many dangers circled it. Instead, Reed drove the black Bentley out of the city, heading toward the outskirts where fields stretched wide and the sky opened up above them. Miles sat in the back seat, silent. His eyes turned toward the window, but not truly seeing anything. His hand remained in his pocket, where $23 still rested like a promise that would never be kept. 40 minutes later, the car stopped in front of a large farm with a 2-story wooden house and a horse barn behind it. This was the farm of Drew and Nina Carver, the place Reed had helped them keep from the bank 3 years earlier when they were about to lose everything. Drew Carver stepped out the front door just as the Bentley engine went quiet. He was a 45-year-old man with broad shoulders and work-worn hands, a weathered face and gentle eyes. He looked at Reed, then at the child stepping out of the back seat, and didn't ask a single question. Some things didn't need explaining. Drew had known Reed long enough to understand that. Nina Carver appeared right behind him, a 42-year-old woman with brown hair pulled back neatly and eyes as warm as autumn. When she saw Miles, the thin child in dirty clothes with hollow eyes, she didn't need an explanation. She simply stepped forward, knelt to his level, and spoke softly. "What's your name, Miles?" She took his small, cold hand in hers. "Come inside with me, Miles. I've got hot water and good food." Nina led Miles into the house, leaving Reed and Drew standing on the porch in the fading light of sunset. "Is there trouble?" Drew asked, his voice low and steady. "There might be, but it's my trouble." Drew nodded and didn't press further. "The boy can stay as long as he needs. Nina will take care of him." Inside the house, Miles was bathed clean for the first time in 2 weeks. Nina gently washed his hair, scrubbing away the dirt and the exhaustion from his pale skin. She dressed him in old clothes that had belonged to a nephew, a little big but clean and warm. She set a bowl of hot chicken soup in front of him, and this time Miles ate, slowly, one spoonful at a time, as if he had forgotten what it felt like to have a real meal. Afterward, Nina led him upstairs to a small room with a single bed, thick blankets, and soft lamplight. He lay down, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as if thinking about something very far away. Nina closed the door gently, and the house settled into silence. Reed couldn't sleep. He sat downstairs in the dark, looking out the window at the stars scattered across the open country sky. He couldn't remember the last time he had looked at stars. Maybe 7 years ago, when James had sat on his shoulders and pointed upward, asking which star was his. At 2 a.m, Reed heard a sound. Small footsteps on the wooden floor, the faint turn of a doorknob. He stood quickly and moved toward the front door, finding Miles there, hand on the knob, trying to open it, bare feet against the cold wood floor. "Where are you going?" Miles turned, green eyes flashing in the dark. "I have to go back to the steps." Reed felt his chest tighten. "Why do you have to go back there? What if my dad comes back and I'm not there?" The boy's voice trembled, small and desperate. "Dad said to wait there. He said he'd come back. If I'm not there, he won't find me. He'll think I left. He'll think I didn't wait for him." And then Miles cried. Not loud, not wild, but broken sobs. The sound of a child who had tried to be brave for 14 days and simply couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears streamed down his hollow cheeks, his thin shoulders shaking in the dark. Reed stood there, not knowing what to do. He didn't know how to comfort a child. He had forgotten that part of himself long ago, when James died and took the father inside him with him. But he didn't walk away. Instead, Reed lowered himself to the floor beside Miles, his back against the door. He didn't speak, didn't promise anything, didn't explain. He just sat there in the dark beside a child who was crying because he was afraid his father would come back and not find him. Miles cried until there were no tears left, until his small body gave in to exhaustion and slowly leaned sideways, falling asleep against Reed's shoulder. Reed didn't move. He stayed there until dawn slipped through the curtains, until birds began to sing outside, until Miles's breathing grew steady and calm. The boy wasn't crying because his father was dead. He was crying because he was afraid his father would come back and not find him. Rumors spread faster than fire. Within 2 weeks, all of Ashford knew about Reed Hartley and the mysterious child. From the damp bars where gangs gathered to the polished offices of the upper class, people whispered about the most powerful crime boss in the Northeast raising an orphan. Some said Reed had lost his mind. Some said it was some kind of scheme. Others claimed the boy was his illegitimate son. No one knew the truth, but everyone was curious. And among the curious, one man was especially interested. On the afternoon of the 15th day since Miles arrived at the Carver farm, a gleaming black Mercedes rolled down the dirt road and stopped at the gate. It wasn't Reed's car. It wasn't anyone Drew Carver knew. Reed was sitting on the porch with Miles when the car pulled in. He rose to his feet, the instincts of a man who had lived in the shadows sharpening at once. His hand brushed lightly against his side, where a gun rested beneath his suit jacket. The car door opened. A man stepped out. 52 years old, silver hair neatly combed, an expensive gray suit, a smile as polished as a campaign poster. Clayton Vance. Reed knew that face. Everyone in Ashford did. Vance was a city council member, president of Vance Development Corporation, a regular presence in the newspapers with charity projects and speeches about the city's bright future. He was called a friend to struggling families, a great philanthropist, a model citizen. Reed didn't believe in such things. He had lived in the dark long enough to know that the brightest men often cast the largest shadows. "Mr. Hartley," Vance began as he approached, his voice smooth as honey, "I've heard about your noble act. It's admirable that a busy man like yourself would take time to care for a poor orphaned child." Reed didn't answer. He simply stood there, placing himself between Vance and Miles, gray eyes cold as steel, fixed on the man before him. Vance didn't flinch under that stare. He continued, the smile never fading. "I've come to offer assistance. I have connections with the finest child welfare organizations in the state. They can provide the boy with a more suitable environment, a real family, a brighter future than what you can offer." "Not necessary," Reed replied, his voice flat and final. Vance tilted his head, feigning surprise as if he hadn't expected refusal. "Mr. Hartley, I say this with goodwill. You're a busy man with many, complicated affairs. A child needs stability, a safe environment. Do you believe your life is appropriate for that? I believe that's none of your concern." The smile on Vance's lips tightened for a fraction of a second, before returning to its practiced warmth. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a confidence. "Mr. Hartley, I'm trying to be polite here, but you must understand that the court won't allow a businessman like you to raise a child. Your reputation isn't exactly clean. I can make this go smoothly, or I can let the law handle it. The choice is yours." Reed took one step forward. Just one, but it was enough to make Vance step back, the smile vanishing, his eyes flashing with the first hint of fear. "You just threatened me," Reed said, his voice low and deliberate, like the growl of a predator. "In front of the child I'm protecting, in the home of my friends. I suggest you leave. Now." Vance stood there for a moment, regaining his composure. Then he nodded, the smile returning, though edged now with something darker. "I understand. You need time to think. I'll be back. And Mr. Hartley," he turned toward his car, "believe me, the court will side with me." The Mercedes drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging over the dirt road. Reed watched until it disappeared beyond the bend, then pulled out his phone and called Jonah. "I need everything on Clayton Vance. Everything. Especially any connection between him and Connor Donovan or the Ashford chemical plant. As fast as possible." 2 days later, Jonah brought the answers. They met in Reed's office, a dark room with heavy curtains drawn where the most important decisions were made. Jonah placed a stack of documents on the desk, his scarred face tighter than usual. "Connor Donovan owned a piece of land," Jonah began. "Inherited from his grandfather, out west of Ashford. You said it wasn't worth much. It wasn't before." Jonah unfolded a map and pointed to a red-marked section. "But 6 months ago, the city council approved a new urban development project. Guess who the primary developer is?" "Vance." Jonah nodded. "A project worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And Connor Donovan's land sits right in the center. Without it, the project can't move forward." Reed studied the map, the pieces aligning in his mind. If Miles went into foster care, Vance could easily manipulate the system and seize that land. "There's more." Jonah turned another page, his voice lowering. "I found internal emails from Vance's company. 3 months before the explosion, there was a report about serious safety issues at the chemical plant. Outdated equipment, faulty warning systems, chemical leaks. Vance was the primary owner of that plant, through a subsidiary. He received the report and ordered it buried. Why?" Jonah looked directly at Reed. "If the plant shut down for repairs, the real estate project would be delayed. He chose money. 7 workers died. Connor Donovan died." Silence filled the room. Reed looked down at the documents, his hand slowly curling into a fist. The man who came to the farm with a polite smile and an offer of help was the same man who had killed Miles's father. The man who claimed he wanted to save the boy was the one who had made him an orphan. Reed understood now. This wasn't only about protecting a child. This was war. And in this war, Reed Hartley wouldn't lose. The man who wanted to save the boy was the man who had killed his father. Vance didn't wait long. 1 week after the meeting at the farm, he filed a petition with the court requesting that Miles Donovan be placed into the state foster system as a responsible citizen concerned for the welfare of a child in the community. The reason stated in the filing was clear and sharp as a blade. Reed Hartley was unfit to care for a child. He was associated with organized criminal activity. He was a danger to the safety and development of the boy. The first hearing was scheduled for a bleak Tuesday morning, the Ashford sky hanging gray and heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The county courthouse stood in an old stone building, with towering columns and hallways that echoed with footsteps. Reed arrived early, his black suit pressed to perfection, his face composed and unreadable. But inside, he was bracing for a battle he wasn't certain he could win. The courtroom wasn't large, yet it was packed. Reporters, lawyers, court staff, and the curious who wanted to see the infamous crime lord stand before the law. Vance sat at the left table with his team of expensive attorneys, a polite smile resting on his lips, as if he were attending a social gala instead of a hearing. Miles sat in the back row with Nina Carver, green eyes wide as he looked around in confusion and fear. He didn't understand why he was here, why there were so many strangers, why the air felt tight enough to choke on. Judge Patricia Holloway entered, and the room rose. She was a 60-year-old woman with neatly cropped silver hair and sharp eyes that had examined thousands of cases over 30 years on the bench. She was known for being fair and impossible to buy, a fact that left both Reed and Vance unsure whether to feel relieved or uneasy. The hearing began. Vance's attorney stood, a middle-aged man with a warm baritone and the confidence of someone who had won countless legal battles. "Your Honor," he began, "we're here today because the safety of a 6-year-old child has been placed in jeopardy. Reed Hartley, who is claiming guardianship of this boy, is a notorious figure within organized crime in the Northeast." He began to list them. Rumors of illegal operations, reports of violence and intimidation, questionable ties to gangs. Each accusation landed like a stone thrown at Reed, building a wall between him and the child he was trying to protect. "A child who has already lost his father," the attorney continued, his voice thick with manufactured emotion, "deserves to live in a safe environment, protected by individuals of integrity and moral standing, not in the shadows of the criminal underworld." Reed sat motionless, his expression unchanged, yet he could feel the scale tipping against him. Every eye in the courtroom rested on him with suspicion and judgment. He was the monster. He was the danger. He was unworthy. Reed's attorney rose in response. "Your Honor, everything presented by opposing counsel is rumor and speculation. Mr. Hartley has never been convicted of any crime. There's no evidence of illegal activity, only gossip and prejudice. Meanwhile, Mr. Hartley has provided Miles with safe shelter, adequate food, and medical care. The boy was malnourished when Mr. Hartley found him. He's now recovering. Is that the action of a dangerous man, or of someone trying to do the right thing?" The arguments moved back and forth, words sharp as drawn blades. Reed remained still, staring ahead, though from time to time he turned to look at Miles. The boy was curled into himself on the bench, gripping Nina's hand tightly, his eyes red and glassy with unshed tears. At last, Judge Holloway raised her hand for silence. She sat for a moment, looking down at the files before her, then lifted her gaze to Reed, to Vance, and finally to Miles in the back row. "I've heard enough arguments about statutes and regulations," she said, her voice low yet carrying through the room. "But there's something both sides seem to be forgetting." She gestured toward Miles. "That boy, a 6-year-old who sat waiting for his father for 14 days on cold concrete steps. A child who has lost everything and has no one in this world. That boy deserves to be loved. The question isn't who has more power, who has more money, or who has a cleaner reputation. The question is who will give him that." Silence settled over the courtroom. Judge Holloway continued, "I won't issue a final ruling today. Miles Donovan will remain at the Carver farm under the supervision of Child Protective Services. Mr. Reed Hartley has 6 months to prove he's fit to serve as legal guardian. During that time, he must meet the following conditions: clear and verifiable lawful employment, stable and child-safe housing, monthly reports to the supervising agency, and no legal violations of any kind, not even the smallest." She looked directly at Reed. "Do you accept these conditions, Mr. Hartley?" Reed stood, his voice steady without hesitation. "I accept." The judge struck her gavel, ending the hearing. People began to file out, whispers rising in waves. Vance stood, his smile intact, though his eyes were ice-cold as he glanced at Reed. 6 months, he murmured quietly enough for only Reed to hear. "Do you think you can change who you are in 6 months? I'll be watching." Reed didn't respond. He simply turned and walked toward Miles, who was waiting with Nina. The boy looked up at him anxiously and asked in a small voice, "Do I have to leave, Uncle Reed?" Reed knelt to his level, his voice gentle in a way no one in his underworld had ever heard. "No, you're staying. I promise. 6 months. A crime lord had 6 months to prove he could be a father." On the first day after the hearing, Reed called Jonah into his office and made a decision no one expected. "All unofficial operations," he said, his voice without hesitation. "You handle them from now on. I need to focus on other things." Jonah looked at Reed for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. Yet in his eyes there was something like surprise mixed with respect. "Are you sure?" It wasn't really a question. Jonah nodded and said nothing more. He had worked with Reed long enough to know that once his boss decided something, nothing would change it. And just like that, Reed Hartley began an entirely different life. Instead of meetings in the shadows and decisions that could alter the fate of a city, he spent his time at the Carver farm. Instead of expensive suits and polished leather shoes, he wore worn jeans and wrinkled shirts. Instead of commanding an empire from a distance, he learned how to mend a broken fence. Drew Carver was the one who taught him. The 45-year-old man with calloused hands didn't ask why a crime lord wanted to learn how to hammer nails or change the oil in a tractor. He simply handed Reed a hammer and said, "Follow me." In the early days, Reed was clumsy to the point of embarrassment. He missed nails, split wooden boards, and couldn't tell one tool from another. The hands that had once signed death sentences blistered and hardened from the simplest labor. But he didn't quit. Each day he arrived earlier, stayed later, learned more. Miles watched all of it. The boy began trailing after Reed like a small shadow, short steps hurrying to match the longer stride of the grown man. When Reed fixed a fence, Miles sat nearby and handed him nails. When Reed tended the horses, Miles stood outside the stall, watching with wide eyes. He didn't speak much, but his presence there, always there, was a quiet reminder of why Reed was doing any of this. One afternoon near the end of the first month, Reed decided to teach Miles to ride. "We're going to try something new today," he said, leading him toward the barn. "Drew has a gentle horse named Maple. I think you can try riding her." Miles stood before the brown horse, his small body rigid, green eyes lifted toward the tall animal as it snorted and tossed its mane. He didn't say anything, but Reed saw it immediately. The way Miles's hands clenched, the half-step backward, the shallow, quick breaths. The boy was afraid, but he didn't say it, because Miles Donovan had learned that saying you're afraid doesn't change anything, that crying doesn't bring your father back, that the world doesn't care how a 6-year-old feels. Reed knelt down to his level, as he had done many times before. "You're scared, aren't you?" Miles hesitated, then gave a small nod, as if admitting fear were something shameful. "It's okay," Reed said softly in a way he hadn't known he still could. "Being scared is normal. I've been scared too." Miles looked up, green eyes widening with genuine surprise. "You've been scared too. Everyone's afraid of something, kid." Reed rested a hand on Miles's shoulder, feeling the small body trembling beneath his palm. "What matters isn't not being afraid. What matters is not letting fear win. Do you understand?" Miles thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I think I do." Then he looked back at the horse, took a deep breath, and said, "I want to try." Reed helped Miles onto the saddle, one hand holding the reins, the other steady at the boy's back. The horse walked slowly around the yard. At first, Miles sat stiff as carved wood, but gradually he relaxed as he realized he wasn't falling, he wasn't getting hurt, he was doing it. And then he laughed. It was the first true laugh since he learned his father had died. Not the small, hesitant smile Reed had seen before, but a big laugh, the laugh of a child who is happy, brightening his thin face and making his green eyes shine like emeralds in the afternoon sun. "Uncle Reed, I'm doing it. I'm riding a horse." Reed stood there watching Miles laugh and felt something stir in his chest, something warm, something he had believed died 7 years ago when he lost Meredith and James. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was close to it. A spark of hope, a reason to keep going, a reason to wake up tomorrow. That night, after Miles had fallen asleep and the farm had gone quiet, Reed sat alone on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. For the first time in 7 years, he didn't think about death, didn't think about emptiness, didn't wonder whether tomorrow was worth living. Instead, he thought about Miles's smile, about the way the boy held his hand, about the way he said his name with complete trust. And for the first time in 7 years, Reed Hartley wanted to see tomorrow. The second month began with new changes. Father Brendan O'Malley arrived at the Carver farm on an autumn morning when the leaves were turning gold and amber and the cool air carried the scent of damp earth. He was a 55-year-old man with salt and pepper hair and deep blue eyes that had seen both heaven and hell. He came to teach Miles how to read and write, part of the court's requirement to ensure the boy received an education. Reed stood on the porch watching the priest step out of an old car. He wasn't a religious man. He didn't believe in redemption or heaven. He had seen too much cruelty to believe in anything beyond power and money. But Miles needed to learn, and Father O'Malley was the only man in town willing to come to the farm of the rumored crime lord. Miles and the priest sat in the living room, books spread across the table, the priest's warm voice sounding out each letter and guiding the boy's small hand as he practiced writing. Reed stood outside the window, watching until Father O'Malley stepped out during a short break. The two men faced each other on the porch, silent for a moment before the priest spoke. "I know who you are, Mr. Hartley." Reed wasn't surprised. The whole town knew who he was. "Did you come to judge me?" Father O'Malley looked out across the distant fields, his eyes carrying the faraway look of a man remembering another life. Before I became a priest, I was a soldier. I served in places whose names never made the newspapers. I did things that still visit me in my nightmares. I killed men, Mr. Hartley. Not one, not two, more than I can count. Reed watched him without speaking, yet something shifted in his gaze. Father O'Malley turned back to him, his voice steady and firm. I didn't come here to judge you. I came to tell you something it took me 20 years to understand. Redemption isn't about deserving. No one deserves redemption. If we deserved it, it wouldn't be redemption. It would only be a reward. He placed a hand on Reed's shoulder, a simple gesture heavy with understanding. Redemption is about action when the opportunity comes. And your opportunity is sitting in that living room, learning how to write his name. Don't miss it. That afternoon, Dr. Paul Whitmore arrived for Miles's routine checkup. He was a 63-year-old retired physician who had once been a renowned surgeon before his conscience led him to leave a major hospital and open a free clinic for the poor. He examined Miles carefully, measuring his weight, checking his eyes, listening to his heart and lungs, asking about sleep and appetite. When he finished, he asked Reed to step outside for a private word. The boy has gained 3 pounds, Dr. Whitmore said with quiet satisfaction. Mild malnutrition, but he's recovering very well. Better color in his skin. Brighter eyes. That's a good sign. Anything else? Reed asked. Dr. Whitmore glanced through the window where Miles was sitting with Nina drawing pictures. More important than the physical improvements, he said gently. The boy is healing emotionally. I've seen many abandoned children, Mr. Hartley. Most carry their wounds for life. But this one, he looked back at Reed. This one has someone who truly cares, and that makes a greater difference than any medicine I could prescribe. That evening, as Reed sat on the porch as he often did, Miles came running out of the kitchen with flour on his hands and a glow on his face. Nina followed behind him, smiling with quiet affection. Uncle Reed, Miles called, his voice bursting with excitement. I made cookies. I made them for you. He held out a plate with what Reed assumed were cookies. They were burned around the edges, uneven and crooked, and smelled faintly scorched. But Miles was looking at him with bright, hopeful pride. My dad didn't know how to bake, Miles said, his voice a little softer. But Miss Nina taught me. Do you like cookies? Reed looked at the burnt, misshapen cookie, then at the child standing before him with waiting eyes. He remembered 7 years ago when James had baked with Meredith and brought him something just like this with that same eager smile. He picked up a cookie and took a bite. It was hard as stone and bitter from being overdone, but Reed chewed slowly, swallowed, and said, It's the best I've ever had. Miles laughed, the brightest laugh Reed had ever seen on his face. And then, before he could stop himself, Reed laughed too. Not the practiced smile he used in negotiations. Not the cold grin he used to threaten enemies, but a real laugh, rising from a place deep inside he had believed was long dead. Nina stood in the doorway, quietly wiping tears as she watched. A burned cookie. 7 years without laughter. And at last, Reed Hartley had laughed. In the 3rd month, Clayton Vance decided he wouldn't wait any longer. He had remained still for too long, allowing Reed Hartley to build the image of a devoted father, while his own multi-million-dollar project sat stalled over a small piece of land that belonged to an orphaned child. Vance wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He hired the most expensive private investigation firm in the Northeast, specialists in digging through pasts and unearthing secrets people wanted buried. They followed Reed every day, documenting every meeting, every phone call, every person he encountered. They searched for any proof that Reed was still involved in illegal operations. But what they found proved even more valuable. A former subordinate of Reed's, a man Reed had cast out 2 years earlier for betrayal, was living in poverty and nursing resentment. Vance approached him with a bag of cash and a simple promise. Testify against Reed Hartley, and your life changes. The man agreed immediately. From there, the rumors began to spread. Not the old rumors about a crime lord, new ones, more poisonous, carefully designed to destroy everything Reed had been building. Reed Hartley exploits children. Why would a mafia boss raise an orphan? Is the child a victim or a tool? The questions were whispered in cafes, murmured on street corners, shared across social media with frightening speed. People didn't need evidence to believe the worst about a man with a dark reputation. They only needed a reason to judge. Public opinion began to turn. Those who had once been silent now demanded the child be protected. Those who had never cared suddenly styled themselves as champions of justice. No one mentioned walking past those steps for 14 days without stopping. No one mentioned leaving a child hungry and cold while telling themselves someone else would help. The Carver farm became collateral damage. Drew and Nina's neighbors began to distance themselves. Shopkeepers in town looked at them with suspicion. One night, someone threw a stone through their window with a note that read, "Don't shelter the devil." Drew said nothing. He simply swept up the broken glass and returned to work as usual. But Reed saw the weariness in the eyes of the man who had given him refuge without asking for anything in return. Everything was beginning to crumble. Reed could feel it. The wall he had built over 3 months was under siege from every direction. His attorney called daily with worse news. The supervising agency demanded additional reports. The next hearing was approaching, and he didn't know if he could withstand it. That night, Reed sat in the living room with Drew and Nina, speaking in low voices about the situation. Yet in the quiet house, even low voices traveled through thin walls. And Miles, who should have been asleep, stood in the hallway listening. He heard everything. About Vance. About the hearing. About someone trying to take him away. About things getting worse. He stepped into the living room, bare feet on the cold wood floor, green eyes dark in the dim light. All 3 adults fell silent when they saw him. Miles walked straight to Reed and looked at him with eyes far too old for 6. "They want to take me away, Uncle." The question struck Reed like a blade to the chest. He could lie. He could say everything would be fine. He could pretend the boy hadn't heard. But Reed had promised himself he'd never lie to this child. He knelt to Miles's level as he had so many times before. "Some people want that," he said plainly, his voice low and steady. Miles was quiet, small hands clutching the hem of his sleep shirt. Then he asked in a voice thin as breath, "Do you want me to go?" Reed looked into those green eyes so painfully like James's, eyes that had trusted him since the first day on those cold steps, and he answered with the greatest certainty he had ever known. "No, I won't let anyone take you. Not Vance. Not the court. No one. Do you hear me? You're staying with me." Miles studied him for a long moment as if searching for any trace of a lie. He found none. Only truth. Truth in gray eyes that had seen too much darkness and were now fighting toward the light. Then Miles did something he hadn't done with anyone since his father died. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Reed. Small arms around the man's neck, his face pressed into Reed's shoulder, his thin body trembling but clinging as if letting go would mean losing everything. Reed froze for a heartbeat. It had been 7 years since he had been held like that. 7 years since James had hugged him before bed and said, "Daddy, I love you." 7 years thinking he had forgotten this feeling. But his body remembered. His heart remembered. And Reed held Miles back, strong arms gentle around the small frame, holding him as if he were holding the most precious thing in the world. An orphaned child embracing a crime lord. And the crime lord swore no one would ever tear them apart. The second hearing took place on a cold, rainy day near the end of the 4th month. The Ashford sky hung heavy and gray as lead, rain striking the courthouse windows like drums, foretelling something ominous. The courtroom was more crowded than before, reporters pushing for space, cameras positioned at every angle, the tension so thick it felt as if it could be cut with a blade. Reed sat at the defense table beside his attorney, his face as composed as ever, though inside he knew this battle would be far more brutal. Vance was prepared. He had waited 4 months for this moment. Judge Holloway struck the gavel and the hearing began, and Vance wasted no time. "Your Honor," his attorney rose with confident triumph, "we present a new witness, a man who worked directly for Mr. Hartley and can testify to the true nature of this individual." The courtroom doors opened. Marcus Webb walked in, a 40-year-old man with a hollow face and evasive eyes. Reed recognized him instantly. The man he had fired 2 years earlier for selling information to rivals. The man who had betrayed him once and was now being paid to betray him again. Webb took the witness stand, his hand trembling slightly as he swore to tell the truth. Then he began. He spoke of meetings in the shadows, of dangerous orders, of people who disappeared after displeasing Mr. Hartley, of an empire built on fear and violence. Each word struck like a bullet aimed at Reed's future. He wove half-truths with exaggerations and distortions, shaping the image of a monster wearing a man's face. Reed's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The people in the courtroom looked at Reed differently now, no longer with curiosity or suspicion, now with disgust and judgment. He was a monster. He was a danger. He didn't deserve to be near a child. Across the aisle, Vance sat with a satisfaction carefully masked behind a solemn expression. He was winning. He knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. Then Vance's attorney made the request many had anticipated. "Your Honor, we ask to question the boy, Miles Donovan. He is the only one who can tell us what life with Mr. Hartley is truly like." Judge Holloway considered for a moment, then nodded. "Granted, on the condition that a child psychologist supervise, and the boy may stop at any time." Miles rose from the back row, his small hand squeezing Nina's before letting go. He walked down the aisle, small and fragile among the staring adults, but his steps were steady. His green eyes looked straight ahead. He climbed into the witness chair, feet not touching the floor, posture straight as a miniature grown man. The psychologist sat beside him, ready to intervene. Vance's attorney approached with a voice coated in false sweetness. "Hello, Miles. Can you answer a few questions for me?" Miles nodded. "Are you afraid of Mr. Hartley?" "No." The short, firm answer caught the attorney off guard, though he quickly recovered. "Not at all. You've heard what people say about him. Do you know who he is?" Miles looked directly into the attorney's eyes without flinching. "I know. Why aren't you afraid?" Miles was quiet for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Then he spoke, his small voice clear in the silent courtroom. "I know everyone's afraid of Uncle Reed. I hear them talk. I see how they look at him. But they don't know what I know." He paused and drew a deep breath. "I sat on those steps for 14 days. 14 days waiting for my dad. 14 days cold and hungry. People walked by. Police walked by. Grown-ups walked by. No one stopped. No one asked if I was hungry. No one asked if I needed help. They just looked and kept walking." His voice trembled, but he didn't cry. He continued, each word falling like a stone into the silence of those who had passed him by. "Only Uncle Reed stopped. He asked if I was hungry. He bought me food. He gave me a place to stay." The attorney tried to interrupt, but he is a... Miles didn't let him finish. His voice grew stronger, as if the past 3 months had taught him how to stand for what he believed. "He taught me to ride a horse. He ate the burned cookies I made and said they were good. He sat with me when I cried at night because I missed my dad. He didn't walk away. He stayed." Miles looked around the courtroom at the silent adults watching him and delivered his final words with steady certainty. "Bad people don't do that. Bad people walk away. Bad people don't stop." Silence. Absolute silence filled the courtroom. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the rain outside seemed to pause before the truth spoken by a 6-year-old child. Vance's attorney stood there, mouth slightly open, unable to find a response. He returned to his seat pale-faced, knowing his arguments had just been dismantled by a few simple sentences. Judge Holloway looked at Miles. Her sharp eyes softened in a way rarely seen. Then she turned to Reed, who sat frozen at the defense table, hands clenched into fists, jaw tight, gray eyes shining with unshed tears. The most powerful crime lord in the Northeast, a man who never revealed emotion, was fighting back tears in front of the entire courtroom. The judge tapped her gavel gently. 15-minute recess. But everyone in that room knew something had shifted. A 6-year-old boy had stood before the court and spoken a truth no adult had dared to say. That sometimes the only one who stops isn't the perfect man. They returned to the Carver farm after night had fully fallen. The hearing ended without a final ruling, Judge Holloway stating she needed more time to deliberate and would deliver her decision at the next session the following month. But something had shifted. Everyone felt it. Miles's words had shaken the room in a way no attorney's argument ever could. The car stopped at the porch, and Nina came out to greet them with a hot dinner waiting inside. Miles ate a few bites and began to yawn. Yet as Nina led him upstairs, his eyes kept turning back toward Reed as if he wanted to say something but hadn't found the moment. Reed didn't eat. He sat alone on the porch in the dark, staring across the black fields beneath faint starlight. The autumn night air cut cold, but he didn't go inside. He needed space. He needed silence. He needed to process what had happened that day. Miles's words echoed through him. "He sat with me when I cried at night. He didn't walk away. He stayed. Bad people don't do that." For 7 years, Reed had told himself he was a monster, that he didn't deserve love, that the deaths of Meredith and James had been a death sentence for whatever humanity remained in him. For 7 years he had built a wall around his heart, high enough no one could climb it, thick enough nothing could pierce it, and a 6-year-old boy had done what no one else ever could. It was past 11 when Reed heard the soft sound of a door opening. Small footsteps on wood. The steady breathing of a child who should have been asleep. Miles stepped onto the porch in his pajamas, barefoot. He didn't speak. He simply walked over and sat beside Reed on the bench, his small legs swinging above the floorboards. "You should be asleep," Reed said, his voice rough after hours of silence. "I couldn't sleep. I thought maybe you couldn't either." Silence settled again. The wind moved through the fields, carrying the whisper of leaves and distant insects. They sat there, a crime lord and an orphaned child, staring into the dark as if sharing a secret without words. Then Miles spoke, softly and carefully, as though touching something fragile. "Do you want to tell me about your son?" "I'll listen." Reed went still. His hand tightened on the edge of the bench. His heartbeat quickened, heavy against his ribs. 7 years. 7 years he hadn't spoken about James to anyone. 7 years he had buried that name along with the broken part of his soul. Whenever someone mentioned it, he changed the subject or walked away. Whenever memories rose, he drowned them in work, in whiskey, in anything that numbed. But sitting there beside Miles in the dark, Reed didn't want to run anymore. He was silent for a long time, long enough that Miles might have thought there would be no answer. But the boy didn't press, didn't rush him. He simply sat there, patient, as if he had all night to wait. And maybe he did. At last Reed spoke. His voice was hoarse, unused, like something long locked away. "My son's name was James. He was 4. He stopped, swallowing hard, steadying the tremor in his voice. "You have eyes like his. Nothing more. No recounting of that terrible night. No description of pain or loss. None was needed. 2 simple sentences held everything. His name, his age, and the truth that every time Reed looked into Miles's eyes, he saw his own boy. Miles didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask why James wasn't here anymore. He sat quietly for a moment, thinking, then reached out and took Reed's hand in his small one. "I bet he loved you very much," Miles said with certainty, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. "Just like I do." And the wall collapsed. 7 years of building, 7 years of strength, 7 years of withstanding enemies, the world, himself. All of it shattered in the instant a 6-year-old said, "Just like I do." Reed cried. Not loud, not broken sobs, but silent tears streaming down his face into the dark, unrestrained, like a dam finally giving way after too many years of pressure. He didn't hide them, didn't turn away, didn't try to be strong the way he had for 7 long years. He simply let the tears fall, let the grief he had buried finally breathe. Miles said nothing. He didn't ask why Reed was crying or offer empty comfort. He just sat there, small hand holding tight to Reed's, silent and steady like an anchor keeping a ship from drifting in a storm. They stayed that way through the night. No more words. None were needed. Just 2 hands clasped together, one large and calloused, one small and soft, in the cold darkness, with the wind whispering around them. When dawn began to blush along the eastern horizon, Reed looked down and saw Miles asleep against his shoulder, hand still wrapped around his, face peaceful as an angel's. And Reed understood something. It was the first time in 7 years he had cried. It was also the first time in 7 years someone had allowed him to be weak. 7 years of walls. 7 years without tears. A 6-year-old boy had given the most powerful crime lord permission to be human. The next morning, Reed left the farm early with a new resolve. The night before had shifted something inside him. It wasn't only the first tears in 7 years. It was the realization that he was no longer fighting alone. He was fighting for Miles. And to do that, he needed weapons. Legal weapons. Reed summoned Jonah to his office and gave him clear instructions. "I want everything on Clayton Vance. Not rumors. Not speculation. Evidence. Evidence that can stand in a courtroom." Jonah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You want to play clean this time. I want to win this time. And I want to win in a way no one can challenge." For the next 3 weeks, Jonah's team worked without pause. They didn't threaten or bribe the way Reed once would have in the underworld. They hired legitimate investigators, the best attorneys, and specialists who knew how to dig through public records without breaking the law. Vance had grown too confident. He believed reputation and money could bury anything. He was wrong. The results were laid before Reed late in the 5th month. Jonah opened each file, his voice low and steady like a verdict being read. Land fraud. Vance purchased properties at absurdly low prices through shell companies, then resold them to his own corporation at 10 times the value. Tax evasion, money laundering, all traceable. Reed flipped through the pages, gray eyes scanning numbers, signatures, questionable transactions. What else? Bribery of local officials. Jonah slid another folder forward. We found concealed payments to at least 3 city council members over the past 5 years. In exchange, they approved Vance's projects without public bidding or environmental review. Reed nodded, but he knew this still wasn't enough. Fraud and bribery could damage Vance legally, yet they didn't directly tie into the custody case. He needed something stronger, something that would shatter Vance's credibility and expose the true motive behind taking Miles. And this is the most important part. Jonah placed a thick stack of printed emails on the desk. We gained access to Vance's internal email server. Legally, through a former IT employee willing to testify. Reed lifted the pages and began to read. His blood ran cold. 3 months before the chemical plant explosion, the chief engineer had sent a detailed safety report. Leak detection systems were failing. Chemical pipelines were corroded. Pressure valves required immediate replacement. The report was sent directly to Clayton Vance, with a recommendation to shut the plant down for at least 2 months of repairs. Vance's reply was only a few lines. Don't shut down. Continue operations. The Westfield project must remain on schedule. Bury this report. The Westfield project. The multi-million-dollar development sitting on Connor Donovan's land. The project Vance protected at the cost of 7 lives. Reed set the emails down, jaw tight, gray eyes dark as a storm front. He knew, Reed said quietly. He knew the plant could explode and still sent those men to work. 7 dead. Connor Donovan dead. And he came to the farm smiling, offering help to the orphan of the man he killed. The next day, Reed walked into Clayton Vance's office without warning. No appointment. No announcement. He moved past security, as though he owned the building, and no one dared stop him. The secretary reached for the phone to call security. But Reed had already pushed open the heavy oak door before anyone reacted. Vance sat behind his polished desk, phone to his ear. When he saw Reed, he froze, then ended the call and stood, anger masking panic. What are you doing here? Threatening me. I'll call the police. I'm not threatening you, Reed said calmly, a calm that felt more dangerous than fury. He stepped closer, placed both hands on the desk, and leaned forward. I'm here to tell you something. You're going to lose. Vance laughed, strained and brittle. Do you know who you are? You're a criminal. I'm a respected businessman. Who do you think the court will believe? That's true. Reed nodded, as if acknowledging an obvious fact. I am a criminal. I've done many bad things in my life. But there's one thing I've never done. He paused, meeting Vance's eyes. I have never killed 7 innocent men for money. You have. The color drained from Vance's face. He stepped backward, bumping into his chair, nearly losing balance. You don't know what you're talking about. You have no proof. Reed didn't answer. He straightened slowly, buttoned his jacket with deliberate care, and turned toward the door. At the threshold, he paused without looking back, and spoke just loud enough for Vance to hear. Are you sure about that? Then he walked out, leaving Clayton Vance pale and trembling behind his desk. Reed didn't need to be a good man. He only needed to be better than the man trying to steal his son. The 3rd hearing took place on a morning at the end of the 6th month, when winter was beginning to yield to the first warm hints of spring. This was the decisive hearing. This was the day everything would end. The courtroom was more crowded than ever. Reporters had come from everywhere, cameras set up at every angle, the tension so thick it felt possible to hear your own heartbeat. Reed sat beside his attorney, his face calm, though his hands were clenched beneath the table. Miles sat in the back row with Nina, green eyes never leaving Reed for even a second. Judge Holloway entered, and the entire room rose. She took her seat, sharp eyes sweeping across the courtroom before striking the gavel. The hearing began. Reed's attorney stood first. Your Honor, before a final ruling is made, we present new evidence regarding the true motive behind Mr. Clayton Vance's attempt to place Miles Donovan into state custody. Across the room, Vance sat with his confident smile intact. He didn't believe Reed could touch him. He was a respected businessman, a city council member, a celebrated philanthropist. Reed was merely a man with a dark reputation. The smile vanished as the evidence began to unfold. Page after page was presented. Land fraud, bribery of public officials, and most damning of all, internal emails proving Vance received detailed warnings about critical safety failures at the chemical plant 3 months before the explosion. He ordered the information buried. He placed profit above the lives of 7 workers. He indirectly caused the death of Connor Donovan, Miles's father. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Vance shot to his feet, face flushed with fury. "This is fabrication. Forged evidence. I will sue." Judge Holloway struck the gavel sharply. "Silence, Mr. Vance. Sit down." But the greatest shock was yet to come. The courtroom doors opened, and a man entered. He appeared about 40, his face hardened by life, a burn scar running from his temple down his neck. He walked on crutches, his left leg missing below the knee. Thomas Reed, a worker from the Ashford chemical plant, one of the survivors of the explosion. Thomas was guided to the witness stand. He sat, eyes fixed on Vance with undisguised hatred. Then he began. "We reported the safety issues many times," Thomas said, voice trembling yet clear. "Leaking pipes, broken warning systems. We were afraid. We knew something was wrong, but every time we reported it, management told us orders from above were to keep working. No shutdown, no talking." He swallowed hard. "That night I was on shift with Connor Donovan. Connor was my best friend. We worked together 5 years. He talked about his son all the time, about Miles, about saving enough money to take him to see the ocean because Miles had never seen the ocean." His voice broke. "When the explosion happened, I was near an exit. I was badly injured, but I survived. Connor didn't. 7 men didn't come home that night. 7 families shattered. And he knew," Thomas pointed directly at Vance, "he knew and still sent us into that death trap. For money. For his real estate project." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Vance sat pale as a corpse, hands trembling on the table. Every polished defense, every carefully crafted image of generosity, collapsed in that instant. Judge Holloway then called witnesses in support of Reed. Dr. Whitmore stepped forward first. "Miles has fully recovered physically and emotionally under Mr. Hartley's care. When I first examined him, he was malnourished, frightened, empty. Now he is healthy, joyful, and trusts life again. No medication can accomplish that. Only love can." Father O'Malley followed. "I have taught Miles to read and write for 4 months. He is intelligent, eager, full of potential. More importantly, he is loved, he is guided, he is protected. I have seen many abandoned children in my life. Miles is no longer one of them." May Langston stood next, hands clasped tightly at her chest. "I saw that boy on those steps for 14 days. 14 days I walked past morning and night. I saw him cold and hungry. I saw police walk by. I saw grown people walk by. No one stopped." Her voice faltered. "Only Reed Hartley stopped. I don't know who he was before, but I know he was the only one who stopped." Finally, Drew Carver stood tall, broad-shouldered and steady-voiced. "Reed Hartley has lived on my farm for 6 months. I've watched him work hard. I've watched him learn to mend fences, care for horses, do things he'd never done before. I've seen him sit with Miles for hours, teach him to ride, read to him, stay with him when he cried at night." He looked directly at Reed. "I don't care who he used to be. I care who he is now. And the man I've seen these past 6 months loves that boy like his own. I'm proud to call him my friend." Judge Holloway sat in silence for a long time, sharp eyes moving across the documents before her, then lifting to Vance, to Reed, and finally to Miles in the back row, hope shining in his green eyes. She stood. "I have reviewed all evidence and testimony," she said, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "I'm not here to judge anyone's past. I'm here to judge actions. And the actions of Reed Hartley over the past 6 months have demonstrated both the capacity and the willingness to raise this child." She struck the gavel. "I grant Reed Hartley full legal guardianship of Miles Donovan." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then Miles leapt to his feet, ran down the aisle, and threw himself into Reed's arms. The boy collided with him, small arms wrapping tight, face pressed against his chest as he whispered in a trembling voice, "You'll stay, right?" Reed knelt and held him close. gray eyes wet, voice thick with emotion. "I'll stay. Always." The courtroom was silent. No one laughed, no one whispered, no one filmed or photographed, because everyone understood. This wasn't merely a case, it was redemption. The most dangerous crime lord in the Northeast stood holding a child in open court, and no one laughed, because they all understood this was redemption. 6 months passed after the final hearing. Spring gave way to a radiant summer, then to golden autumn, and now the first days of winter had arrived with a light dusting of snow across the fields of the Carver farm, or more accurately, the Hartley farm. Reed had purchased the entire property from Drew and Nina, not to send them away but to keep them there. He expanded the main house, adding a new wing with a bedroom for Miles, an office for himself, and a large living room where the family could gather together. Drew and Nina remained, managing the farm and becoming an inseparable part of this new family. 1 month after the hearing, Reed formally adopted Miles. Papers were signed, seals were stamped. Miles Donovan became Miles Hartley. He kept Donovan as his middle name to honor the father who had loved him in those first years of life. Miles Donovan Hartley, a name that carried both past and future. Miles's life changed completely. He began attending the elementary school nearby, where he quickly made friends his own age. He was no longer the thin, pale child Reed had found on those cold steps. Now he was healthy, cheeks flushed with color, laughter echoing across the farm each day. It was the bright, unguarded laughter of a child who was loved. Reed changed, too. He still managed his empire, but from a distance, through Jonah and trusted associates. He spent most of his time at the farm, doing ordinary things he never would have imagined 7 years earlier. Mending fences, caring for horses, driving Miles to school each morning, reading to him each night. Small, simple things, yet more valuable than any multi-million-dollar deal he had ever made. One winter morning, as light snow drifted beyond the windows and the smell of hot coffee filled the warm kitchen, everything changed again. Reed sat at the table with a mug in hand, reading the morning paper. Nina cooked at the stove, the soft sizzle blending with gentle music from the old radio. Drew sat across from Reed, quietly enjoying his tea as always. Miles came running down the stairs, hair tousled from sleep, wearing his favorite dinosaur pajamas. He climbed onto his chair and began eating the bowl of cereal Nina had prepared. Everything was ordinary, everything peaceful, like so many mornings over the past year. Then Miles looked up at Reed with clear green eyes and asked in the most natural voice in the world, "Dad, can I go riding with you after breakfast?" Time froze. The coffee mug hovered in Reed's hand. His heart missed a beat, then pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. "Dad!" The boy had just called him Dad. Nina stood at the stove, with her hand over her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. Drew turned toward the window, his shoulders trembling. No one spoke. No one dared disturb the moment. Reed set the mug down slowly, as though any sudden movement might shatter the dream. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. "What did you just call me?" Miles tilted his head, confusion crossing his innocent face. "Dad." He said it simply, as if it were the most obvious truth in the world. "You're my dad." "Right." Reed looked at the child he had found on cold concrete more than a year ago. The child who had taught him how to feel again, how to love again, how to live again. And he couldn't hold back. He rose, walked around the table, and pulled Miles into his arms. Held him tight, held him as though letting go would mean losing everything. "Yes," he said, his voice thick and breaking. "I'm your dad." Miles hugged him back, small arms wrapped around his neck, face pressed into his shoulder. "I love you, Dad." Outside the kitchen doorway, Jonah stood quietly observing. He had come to deliver a routine report, but when he saw the scene inside, he stopped. A younger associate stood beside him, staring in surprise. "The boss has changed," the young man whispered. "Good or bad?" Jonah smiled, a rare expression on his scarred face. "Good. For the first time in 7 years, he wants to live." One word. Dad. 7 years of waiting. 7 years of pain. At last, Reed Hartley was a father again. 2 years passed. Ashford was still the same aging industrial city with shuttered factories and gray streets. Yet something had begun to shift. A small current of hope stirred in the western outskirts, on the very land Connor Donovan once inherited from his grandfather, land that now carried a different purpose. Reed had transferred most of his underground operations to Jonah, who now ran them with the caution and discipline the years beside Reed had carved into him. Reed remained the head, the final authority, but he no longer stepped personally into the shadows. Instead, he turned his attention to legitimate ventures: real estate, construction, and something no one had expected: charity. The idea came to him one sleepless night as he sat on the porch watching Miles sleep. He thought about the steps, about 14 days, about all the other children somewhere waiting for someone who might never stop. And he decided to become the one who stopped. Hartley House rose on the very ground Connor Donovan left to his son, the land Vance once tried to seize for a multi-million-dollar development, the land tied to the deaths of 7 men and the orphaning of 1 child. Now it stood as a refuge. The 2-story building, painted a warm white, stood against green fields with a wide playground, bright gardens, and tall windows that welcomed sunlight inside. There were 12 bedrooms, a large dining hall, a small library, and a common room where children could play and learn. In the main entry hall hung a black and white photograph of Connor Donovan, enlarged from the only picture Miles still owned. Connor was smiling in it, eyes gentle, the face of an honest working man. Beneath the frame, a brass plaque read, "Connor Donovan, the first father who loved Miles." Every time he passed it, Miles paused and touched the glass softly, as though speaking to the father he would never forget. He didn't forget. He never would. But he had learned that love wasn't limited, that a heart could hold both past and present, those who were gone and those who remained. Beside the photograph hung a small wooden board bearing the rules of Hartley House. The words were written in the uneven handwriting of an 8-year-old boy, letters slightly crooked yet sincere beyond measure. No child waits alone. When you see someone who needs help, you stop. Miles wrote those lines on the day Hartley House opened, when Reed asked what message he wanted to leave for the children who would come. He didn't need time to think. He had lived it. He understood. The opening ceremony took place on a warm spring morning 2 years after the courtroom battle that changed everything. Dr. Whitmore attended, Father O'Malley, May Langston, others who had stood beside Reed when it mattered. Judge Holloway came too, smiling when she read the rule Miles had written. "You've done well, Mr. Hartley," she told him. "I've seen many endings in my courtroom. This is one of the best." That afternoon, after the guests had gone and Hartley House grew quiet, a vehicle from Child Protective Services pulled up. They brought a 7-year-old boy, thin, red-eyed, trembling with fear. He had been found at a bus station, sitting there for 5 days waiting for parents who weren't coming back. Miles stood on the porch watching the boy step out. Without being told, he walked down the steps and stopped in front of him. "What's your name?" "Aiden." The boy's voice was barely more than breath. "I'm Miles." Miles tilted his head, green eyes steady with understanding. "How long were you waiting?" 5 days. Miles nodded as if 2 words were enough to explain everything. Then he reached out and took Aiden's hand, small and warm and certain. "Come with me. I know someone who'll help you." Reed stood in the doorway of Hartley House and watched Miles lead Aiden across the yard, up the steps, into the home he had built. His chest tightened at the sight, because he understood. This was the real legacy. Not the empire, not the money, not the power. This, teaching a child who had been saved to become someone who saves others, passing kindness from one generation to the next, making sure no child waits alone again. Miles wasn't only rescued, he learned how to rescue, and that was Reed Hartley's true legacy. That night, after Aiden had fallen asleep in the warmth of his new room at Hartley House and the building settled into silence, Reed and Miles sat on the porch, looking out at the distant lights of Ashford shimmering in the dark. The sky was clear, millions of stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. The spring air carried a chill, yet father and son sat close together, sharing warmth and the quiet peace they had both taken far too long to find. Miles was silent for a while. Green eyes lifted toward the sky as if searching for something among the stars. Then he spoke, his voice soft and thoughtful, in a way only children who have endured too much can manage. "Do you think Dad Connor knows about all this?" Reed looked at his son, his heart tightening at the question. "I think he knows," he said gently, "and I think he's very proud of you, very proud of the person you're becoming." Miles nodded slowly, as though turning over something that had lived in his heart for a long time. "I used to be mad at him," he admitted, not with the sharp hurt of before, but with the calm of someone who has learned to understand. "I was mad because he left me, because he didn't come back, because I had to sit there alone for 14 days. He paused and drew a steady breath. But now I understand. Some people leave because they want to. Some leave because they don't have a choice. Dad Connor didn't want to leave me. He loved me. He just didn't have a way to stay. Miles turned to Reed, green eyes bright in the starlight. What matters is who chooses to stay. And you chose to stay. Thank you for staying. Reed felt his throat close. He pulled Miles into his arms, holding the child who had saved him from his own darkness. Thank you, he whispered, voice rough. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay. They sat in silence, two hearts beating in quiet rhythm, two souls once broken now healing together. Reed thought of Meredith and James, of his wife's smile, of his son's laughter, of the night that took them both. But for the first time in 9 years, those memories were no longer wounds. They were light that guided him, light that reminded him love never truly disappears. It changes form. It lives on through those who remain. It passes from one heart to another. Meredith and James were still there, in his heart, in the love he gave Miles, in Hartley House where no child would ever wait alone again. Sometimes redemption isn't about deserving a second chance. No one deserves it. No one is perfect. Redemption is about taking the chance when it comes. It's about acting when you can. It's about stopping when everyone else walks past. And most of all, it's about never letting go. The story of the man who stopped and the boy who waited would be told in Ashford for years to come. Not in headlines, not on television, but in the children rescued every day at Hartley House. In new smiles, new hopes, new lives rewritten from the beginning. A place where no one waits alone. A place where someone always stops. 14 days of waiting ended the story of one boy, but it began the story of hundreds more, because one man chose to stop. This story offers a profound lesson about compassion and care. In the rush of life, we often walk past those who need help, telling ourselves someone else will step in. But sometimes we're the only one who can make the difference. A small gesture, a single moment of stopping, can change a life forever. And the miracle is that when we save someone else, sometimes we're saving ourselves. Dear friends, how did this story touch your heart? Have you ever been the one who stopped? Or the one someone stopped for? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear the stories that live deep within your hearts. If this story changed something in you, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share this video with those you love. Every share helps spread this message of hope to more people. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you won't miss the moving stories we bring each day. We wish all of you watching good health, joyful lives, and peace in every day. Remember, sometimes stopping doesn't only save someone else, it saves you too. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.